Good Thursday morning, everyone. Welcome into today's daily Bible reading in the prophets and in the New Testament. We are in Isaiah 34 and Luke chapter 16 today. Thanks for tuning in. I know at least here in Cleveland, it is a bit of a cold, dreary day. It's been raining, and so I know that's tough a little bit to get up and going, but glad that you are taking the time to join in with us. It's always good to have something to look forward to doing in order to really get going for the day. And few things are better to look forward to than some daily Bible reading along with a cup of coffee. Maybe I know I have mine. Got to have that life juice to get the blood flowing today. But I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that we'll all be blessed by our reading in God's word today. Again, we are in Isaiah 34, continuing to work our way through this message of the prophets as we look today at the judgment that is coming against the nations, which is something that we've already seen. We have that section, chapters 24 through 27, actually going all the way back to chapter 13. Chapter 13 through chapter 23 is against the specific nations. 24 through 27, and over a statement against the overall world. And now here we're going to revisit that, which is, again, not something that's unfamiliar to us. If we know how the prophets operated, they did not write like we write. We seem to be very linear and very sequential in our writing. That's just our style in our culture, in our times. But for them, they like to cycle through the same issues over and over again, just hitting them from a little bit of a different angle each time they cycle through. And that's what we're seeing today as we're getting back to another judgment against the nations. But remember the context surrounding this is the writing of encouragement to help God's people to recognize their need to not trust in nations. Going back to chapter 30, we have the condemnation against the Egyptian alliance, the encouragement to not align with them because they're going to be destroyed anyways. And chapter 31, the message is that the Lord is the one who will save you, and in fact he will bring down those who you might try to align yourself with. And that is because he is the one who is working throughout history to accomplish incredible things, particularly pertaining to the Messiah. That's chapter 32. And now it is time for the Lord to rise up and to stand against Assyria, this invading army, which is trying to lay siege against Jerusalem. And now it's time to just to re-emphasize again the fact that you trust in nations, and you're just asking for disaster to come upon you. Edom is going to be spoken of specifically here in just a minute. Remember that they had a very rough relationship with Israel, but going back generations, and we'll see that being spoken of just a little bit about their history. Remember that they did not allow Israel to have passage through their territory in Numbers 20. Saul had battles against them in 1 Samuel 14. David even subjugated them in 2 Samuel chapter 8. So there's just a lot going on here between Israel and Judah. And because of all the history of the trouble that Edom has given them, now God is going to judge them as well. And then the destruction that comes upon them is going to be by the hand of God himself. So let's read about that here in Isaiah chapter 34. And then thankfully, once we get through with this section, chapter 35 is very encouraging. It is a beautiful text, just speaking about the restoration and the blessings that are going to come when you do trust in God. So we'll read that tomorrow. Then there is going to be the historical interlude in chapters 36, 37, 38, and 39. And then we'll be done with the first half of the book of Isaiah. And we'll switch then into the second half, beginning in chapter 40, which the rest of the text from then on is extremely messianic in nature. But we'll give some more discussion about that. We'll give some more details about that whenever we get there. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. I say that whenever I'm one doing it. Let's not get ahead of myself today, and let's just go ahead and get into this text of let's see. And of course, somebody is wanting to call me right now, so you will get declined robocall. Don't want to talk to you. Let's check out here the text, Isaiah 34, beginning in verse number 1. Isaiah 34 in verse number 1. You nations, come here and listen. You peoples, pay attention. Let the earth and all that fills it hear, the world and all that comes from it. The Lord is angry with all the nations, furious with all their armies. He will set them apart for destruction, giving them over to slaughter. Their slain will be thrown out. The stench of their corpses will rise. The mountain will flow with their blood. All the stars of the sky will dissolve. The sky will roll up like a scroll, and its stars will all wither as leaves wither on the vine and foliage on the fig tree. When my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens, it will then come down on Edom and on the people I have set apart for destruction. The Lord's sword is covered with blood. It drips with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah, a great slaughter in the land of Edom. The wild ox will be struck down with them, the young bulls with the mighty bulls. Their land will be soaked with blood, and their soil will be saturated with fat. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a time of paying back Edom for its hostility against Zion. Edom's streams will be turned into pitch, its soil into sulfur. Her land will become a burning pitch. It will never go out day or night. Its smoke will go up forever. It will be desolate from generation to generation. No one will pass through it forever and ever. Eagle, owls, and herons will possess it, and long-eared owls and ravens will dwell there. The Lord will stretch out a measuring line and a plumb line over her for her destruction and chaos. No nobles will be left to proclaim a king, and all her princes will come to nothing. Her palaces will be overgrown with thorns, her fortified cities with thistles and briars. She will become a dwelling for jackals, an abode for ostriches. The desert creatures will meet hyenas, and one wild goat will call to another. Indeed, the night birds will stay there and will find a resting place. Sand partridges will make their nests there. They will lay and hatch their eggs and will gather their broods under their shadows. Indeed, the birds of prey will gather there, each with its mate. Search and read the scroll of the Lord. Not one of them will be missing. None will be lacking its mate, because he has ordered it by my mouth, and he will gather them by his spirit. He has cast the lot for them. His hand allotted their portion with a measuring line. They will possess it forever. They will dwell in it from generation to generation. The last couple of verses there just speak to the assured nature of God's prediction coming true. Here is Isaiah saying, go ahead, read the scroll, note what's there, and note that whenever this comes to pass, you need to recognize that the Lord is the one who has caused this to come to pass. And really that goes back to verse number 11, where it says that the Lord will stretch out a measuring line and a plumb line over her for her destruction and chaos. That it is the Lord who, this is kind of an oxymoron, but he is constructing their deconstruction. He is the one who is orchestrating it. That'd be a better way to say. He is orchestrating the destruction of Edom and of those who have stood against the Lord. That these animals, in fact, verses 13 to 15, the animals are going to be the one who possess these places where people used to dwell. But the reason for all this is verse number 8. But that the Lord has a day of vengeance, a time for paying back Edom for its hostility against Zion. We spoke of that a few moments ago about the troubled history between Israel and Edom. I believe that going back to the hostility between Esau and Jacob. And that is really what is at play here, is the broken relationship that's been here. Again, even though the Lord has used these various nations to punish his people, the reality is that in doing so, these nations often become very prideful and arrogant, or they go overboard. In any number of issues become apparent within who these nations are, that they are pagan nations, that they are rebels against God, just as Israel and Judah have been rebels against God at various times, and they too are going to be destroyed. Therefore, it is so important that again, they recognize as the children of Israel are reading this prophecy, and they see the prophetic messages against all the nations of the world, specifically Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Moab, Philistia, Arabia, and so many others. And then they read here about the warning against aligning with Egypt. They read here about the warning against Edom for what's coming upon them. The very clear message is just don't trust in the nations. Don't trust in men, because if you trust in men, then just as the Lord is orchestrating disaster to come against Edom and these other nations, that same disaster is going to come against you. So do not trust in them. Trust in the Lord alone. And the reason for that is because just as much as he is going to bring disaster upon them in these ways, just a little quick look ahead, notice the great language of what's going to happen for those who remain in Zion or are able to return to Zion, who return in faithfulness and trust to God. That there's going to be blossoming, abundant blossoming, rejoicing and joy and singing. That's what is in the future for those who trust in the Lord. Don't trust in people, trust in the Lord alone. That is, I believe, one of the really important messages to take away from Isaiah chapter 34. So that said, let's shift now to back to the Gospel of Luke, and we are in chapter 16 today. We only have a few more chapters left in the Gospel of Luke, which if you have never been committed to a daily Bible reading schedule, then it might be that you've never really read this much of the Bible in a short period of time. And before you know it, it's here. Let's see, 16, before the end of next week, I guess it is, you will have read the entire Gospel of Luke in the last 24 days. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. But I do hope that it has been a blessing to you. That's not just a thing of which we want to, of course, we don't want to boast in what we've been doing with this daily Bible reading, but we do want to recognize the good that comes from it. Excuse me. And I hope that you have been able to recognize good within your own life as you have been reading along with us over the past, 34 days now. But with that said, let's read here together what we find in Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16 and verse number 1. I'm going to get you a little swig of coffee real fast. All righty. Let's go ahead and read them together. Luke 16 and verse number 1. Jesus is continuing on in this great section of parables. So let's look and see what he has to say here in Luke 16, verse number 1. Now he, being Jesus, said to the disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. So he called the manager in and asked, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be my manager. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their homes. So he summoned each one of his master's debtors. How much do you owe my master? He asked the first one. 100 measures of olive oil, he said. Take your invoice, he told him. Sit down quickly and write 50. Then he asked another, how much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat. Take your invoice, he told him, and write down 80. The master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light in dealing with their own people. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, since he will either hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and scoffing at him. And he told them, "Who are the ones who you are the ones who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly admired by people is revolting in God's sight." The law and the prophets were until John. Since then, the good news of the kingdom of God has been proclaimed, and everyone is urgently invited to enter. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke or of a letter in the law to drop out. Everyone who divorces everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and everyone who marries a divorced woman from her husband commits adultery. There was a rich man who would dress in purple and fine linen, feasting lavishly every day. But the poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, was lying at his gate. He longed to be filled with what fell from the rich man's table, but instead the dogs would come and lick his sores. One day the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torment in Hades, he looked up and saw Abraham a long way off with Lazarus at his side. "Father Abraham," he called out, "have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this flame." "Son," Abraham said, "remember that during your life you received your good things, just as Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, while you are in agony. Besides all this, a great chasm has been fixed between us and you, so those who want to pass over from here to you cannot, and neither can those from there cross over to us." "Father," he said, "then I beg you to send to my father's house, because I have 5 brothers, to warn them so that they won't also come to this place of torment." But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." But he told him, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded if someone rises from the dead." So with this particular chapter, I mean, there's a lot we can really unpack just to really dissect each of these parables that are discussed here within this particular chapter. I think we recognize the parables pretty easily, and the first set of parables in verse 16, and then, I guess, the first parable in verse 16, and then most people would probably argue about whether or not this is a parable concerning the rich man and Lazarus, or whether that's a story about a real person, or whether it is just different than a parable. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, I think one of the things that we could see here is the love of money. That seems to be something that is being discussed here very strongly, and it centers around what is said in verse 14, where the Pharisees are identified as being lovers of money. And when Luke identifies them as such, he then gives what Jesus says about them, that you justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. God knows who you are, and he knows what you truly value. You don't value serving his people, God's people. You don't value giving glory to God. No, apparently they just value being rich and taking advantage of these positions of leadership in order to be rich. And though people admire you for who you seem to be, who you really are is revolting in God's sight. Think about that, and think about the previous parable, which was all about money and accounts. And then we look at the rich man and Lazarus, and this rich man loved his wealth and was not willing to share with others. So I just think about again, and it ties in somehow. I don't know how this happens as often as it does, but somehow it ties in again with what we read in Isaiah. What do we trust? What do we trust? Do we trust and do we love riches and wealth? Or do we see these things as being for what they are? Number one, blessings given to us by God. And then in return, do we use them as such? Do we use them as tools? Because that's really what our wealth is. Our wealth is a tool, and they should be, that the money that we have should be a tool to use to do good and to bless and to serve. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees, they loved their money. I don't think they were doing that at all. This rich man here had the opportunity with this man Lazarus who was lying at his gate. He had the opportunity to bless this man in an incredible way, but he didn't. And we see the result of such. Once they die, this greedy man is in torment, whereas Lazarus, this poor man, this very humble man, is now carried into paradise, into a blessed place, a place of comfort, in the, as it says, let's see here, being at Abraham's side. And we see that just because someone is able to experience blessings now does not mean that eternity is going to be filled with blessings. Those two don't necessarily correlate. If you have much here, that doesn't mean you're going to have much there. What determines such is how do we use what we have? If we are blessed to have an abundance of monetary means, how do we use those things? Do we try to bless others, or are we greedy and hold them for ourselves? I think about what the rich man says here. I wish that you would just send someone to talk to my brothers. Don't let them make the same mistake. And Abraham says, listen, they're not going to listen to the prophets and those who came before. They're not going to listen to Moses. Then even if someone rises from the dead, they're not going to listen to him either. And I think about that being Jesus too. Jesus rises from the dead, and yet there's so many who are not going to listen to him or the message that is sent out in his name. But for us, we have this message here before us. We have this message of the need to avoid the love of money and the need to avoid trusting in wealth and riches. We need to trust in God, and we need to make sure that we are putting our full confidence in him, and in whatever way that he blesses us monetarily, whether that is with a lot or a little or something in between, we need to make sure that we're using those things to bless others and to bring glory to him. Let's not be greedy. We know that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That greed is only going to get us in trouble in this life. Let's not be greedy. Let's be humble. Let's trust in the Lord, and let's be generous in helping others as best we can in whatever ways we can. That doesn't mean that we're just running around throwing money at people, but let's think about what people actually need. And let's think about using our money sacrificially to help people and to consider the needs of others, and then to act upon that if we have opportunity. That's the thing. It's about opportunity and ability. If we have opportunity, yet we lack ability, well, can't really do much. If you have ability, but don't have opportunity, well, maybe you go create some opportunities. But if we're in those moments where we have opportunity and ability, let's act upon those, and let's bless others. Let's not trust in wealth. Let's not be greedy with our wealth and our blessings, but let's use those to bless others. And in doing so, God will be glorified and praised. So I hope you'll think about those things today as you meditate upon Isaiah 34 and Luke chapter 16. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow for Isaiah 35 and Luke chapter 17. Hope you'll tune back in for that as well. Again, have a great rest of your day. Hope that you stay warm and dry. You don't have to get out in any of this yuckiness. But thanks again for joining in. Have a great day. And we'll see you again tomorrow for another reading